The room smelled of cigarette smoke and espresso, the kind of sharp Italian blend that clings to wool suits and boardroom curtains. It was November 1983. Outside the windows of a hospitality suite at the Circuit Paul Ricard in southern France, the Mistral was blowing hard off the Mediterranean, sending dead leaves spinning across the empty pit lane. Inside, the men in suits were talking, not to Ayrton Senna, but about him, in the way people talk about someone they've already decided not to hire. The words were polite. The decision was not. The message from Parmalat, the Italian dairy company whose name sat across the nose of the Brabham BT52, was simple. They did not want a Brazilian in their car. They wanted an Italian. This was business. This was branding. And in November of 1983, in the minds of European sponsors writing checks large enough to fund a Formula One team, a 23-year-old kid from São Paulo was not what sold product on supermarket shelves in Milan or Turin. A Brazilian doesn't move the needle here. That was the logic, that was the wall. What happened next is the story of every door that closes before the right one swings open. And if you believe, as Senna did, that the hand of God steers more than just race cars, then maybe those closed doors weren't obstacles at all. Maybe they were directions. If you've never heard this chapter of Senna's story, stay with us. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. This channel exists to tell the stories that matter. This is one of them. Ayrton Senna da Silva had arrived in England 2 years earlier with a suitcase, a burning need to race, and almost nothing else. He had already walked away from the sport once, in 1981, after his first Formula Ford season, overwhelmed by the weight of financing a career that European money had little interest in funding. He went home to São Paulo. He spent 4 months working in his father's construction supply business, moving inventory, answering phones, watching the months slide by. Then he came back. His father, Milton, agreed to back him financially along with a small Brazilian bank. 1 more year. 1 more shot. He won 22 races in 1982. 22. And then he won the British Formula 3 Championship in 1983 in one of the most dominant individual performances the series had ever seen. 9 consecutive victories to open the season, a record that made the British motorsport press rename Silverstone, calling it Silverstone in the headlines, a play on his original surname, da Silva. Martin Brundle was his closest rival, and even Brundle later said that Senna was operating on a different frequency. It wasn't just speed. It was something harder to measure, a precision that felt almost inhuman, a calm inside the cockpit that contradicted every external sign of pressure. By the autumn of that year, every major Formula One team was watching. Williams gave him a test at Donington Park, and he outpaced the reigning world champion, Keke Rosberg. McLaren tested him at Silverstone. Ron Dennis was interested, but had already signed Alain Prost after Prost's sudden departure from Renault, and Niki Lauda was already in the other seat. There was no room. Lotus wanted him too, but their title sponsor, Imperial Tobacco's John Player Special brand, demanded a British driver. The contract Senna was not allowed to sign had a nationality clause written into it, not by the team, but by the money. And then there was Brabham. Bernie Ecclestone, the team's owner and the most powerful man in Formula One, had seen enough. He flew Senna to the Circuit Paul Ricard in the south of France on the 14th of November, 1983. The test was a competitive one. Mauro Baldi, Pierluigi Martini, and Roberto Guerrero were also there, each auditioning for the seat vacated by Riccardo Patrese. The Brabham BT52B was a brutal machine, a purpose-built turbocharged weapon running a BMW 4-cylinder engine that reportedly produced over 1,400 horsepower on qualifying boost. The tires were cold in the morning air, the asphalt still damp at the circuit's edges. There was another layer to the difficulty that day. Nelson Piquet, Brabham's lead driver and the reigning world champion, had reportedly instructed the mechanics to set the car up incorrectly before Senna got in. Springs adjusted, alignment off. The car engineered to underperform in the hands of someone who didn't know the machine. This is the world Senna was navigating. Not just competitors on the track, but rivals off it. Men who understood that the fastest new thing arriving at the paddock gates was a threat to their position, their salary, their status. Senna still turned in a time competitive with Baldi. He was a tenth of a second off the mark, in a car that had been set up to betray him. Ecclestone wanted to sign him. He later claimed to have had a letter of intent, but it didn't matter. Parmalat's position was categorical. They were an Italian company. Their money came from Italian consumers. Their identity was rooted in Italian soil, Italian culture, Italian football stadiums, and Italian television commercials. Placing a Brazilian, regardless of his speed, regardless of what he had demonstrated at Donington, at Silverstone, at Paul Ricard, did not align with what they were paying for. The seat went to Teo Fabi, the Italian driver, the brand-safe choice. Ecclestone called Senna a week later and told him it wasn't possible. Senna, according to his close friend and roommate at the time, Mauricio Gugelmin, received the news without collapse. He was disappointed, but he had already learned something essential about how this world worked. Talent was necessary. It was not sufficient. The path forward would require patience, discipline, and the willingness to enter through a door that no one else wanted. That door was Toleman. The Toleman team had entered Formula One only 3 years earlier, running a chassis that struggled to be competitive against the established giants. Their tires, supplied by Pirelli, were considered inferior to the Michelin and Goodyear rubber on the front-running cars. The engine, a turbocharged Hart unit, was underpowered by the standards of Ferrari, Renault, and that very BMW motor that Senna had driven at Paul Ricard. When he did his test at Silverstone with Toleman, after the Brabham door had closed, he told the team honestly, "This is not a car that can win races yet." But he signed anyway. No conditions, no nationality clauses, no one asking what market he represented. He made his Formula One debut at the Brazilian Grand Prix in Rio de Janeiro on the 25th of March, 1984. He qualified 17th and retired on lap 8 when his turbocharger failed. The crowd barely noticed. He was not yet the story. He became the story 4 races later at Monaco. Rain was falling on the streets of the Principality on the 3rd of June, 1984. The race had been running for 31 laps when the conditions deteriorated beyond the appetite of most of the field. Alain Prost was leading in the McLaren, pulling away, managing the wet track with the methodical precision that had already made him a world champion. And then, from behind, came the Toleman, the car that wasn't supposed to be there, driven by the Brazilian that nobody had wanted. On lap 31, Senna was 9 seconds behind Prost. On lap 32, the gap was 7. On lap 33, it was 5. On lap 34, Senna was 2 seconds back and closing, corner after corner, the gap shrinking not at the rate of a faster car, but at the rate of a man who had found something in the rain that others hadn't. A line through the barriers, a rhythm in the chaos, a strange tranquility at the center of what was, by any rational measurement, terrifying. The Toleman's tires were inferior. The engine was down on power, and none of it mattered. The race director waved the red flag on lap 34, citing dangerous conditions. Prost was declared the winner based on standings from the previous lap. Senna was second. The controversy that followed, whether the race was stopped to protect Prost from the inevitable, echoes through Formula One history to this day. But what no one could argue, not Parmalat, not Imperial Tobacco, not any suit in any boardroom, was what they had just seen. The Brazilian had been 2 seconds from passing the world champion in the rain, in the slowest car that had any right to be at the front of the race. The following year, Senna moved to Lotus, then to McLaren, 3 world championships, 65 pole positions, 41 race victories, and the face, that face, the jaw set in concentration beneath the yellow helmet, the eyes locked on something beyond the horizon, the raised fist at Interlagos in 1991, crumpled forward over the wheel and broken with emotion. That face appeared on tens of millions of posters, on walls in Sao Paulo and Tokyo and London and Sao Paulo, on the sides of buses, in the advertisements of brands that would have paid any amount to have what Parmalat once turned away. Banco Nacional, the Brazilian bank that helped keep Senna racing when European money wouldn't touch him, became one of the most recognizable brand symbols in the history of the sport. The blue cap with the national logo, worn by Senna on the podium, became an icon not because it was Italian or British or aligned with any market research, but because the man wearing it was Ayrton Senna. And the world had decided, without any sponsor's permission, who it was going to love. Here is the thing about being told you are not the right kind of person for the room you are standing in. The room is usually wrong. The markets that could not see what Senna offered in November of 1983 were the same markets that spent the following decade trying to attach their names to his. The dairy company that wanted an Italian driver in its car is remembered, if it is remembered at all, as the company that almost had Ayrton Senna. The Italian driver they chose instead is a footnote. You are not a footnote. Whatever room you've been told you don't belong in, whatever door has been shut because your face, your background, your accent, your origin didn't fit the picture someone else had in their head. Understand that the judgment being made is not about your ceiling. It is about the limits of their imagination. Senna did not fight Parmalat's decision. He did not campaign for their approval. He walked out of that hospitality suite at Paul Ricard, flew back to England in the late autumn wind, and found the door that would open, the one that had no conditions attached. And then he drove the slowest car at Monaco in the rain until the race had to be stopped. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that rejection is sometimes redirection, leave a comment with the word Toloman, because that's where it started. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories here, and every single one of them is about what happens when someone refuses to accept that talent has a nationality.